Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Gifted in Real Life podcast, where we discuss all things related to gifted learners and helping them to launch in life. Today, we have a very special guest, Alexis Rigel Johns, who is also known as AJ. I'm so excited to have this conversation today. Well, before we get started, would you please share with our viewers a little bit about your background, kind of who you are and what it is that you do?
Sure. So I have a PhD in research cognitive psychology. And the reason that I took that route initially was I always liked learning and I wanted to help and I wanted to discover and explore more about humans. And the way that we talk to children, what do you want to be when you grow up, actually limits them to a set of like 15 things, right? But then by the time we're adults, none of our friends actually have those 15 careers. So as a child, I was told you would make a great lawyer, you would make a great engineer. And I think that comes down to the attributes lawyer. So I was very specific with language, or what someone would say argumentative, which I think a lot of gifted people are. It's not argumentative, we're precise. And the engineering was because I like to play with math, and math was the logical problems that I encountered in school. So that shifted in college. I actually got an F in thermodynamics, which is a really funny story for high achievers, right? I took 2 years of undergraduate engineering, and I just wasn't connecting with it. I would cry before midterms. I wasn't putting in the work. I didn't care. So I was salutatorian in high school, ranked 2 out of 500 students.
Wow.
And then full scholarship to college, lost that full scholarship because I stayed in the engineering path, thinking that that was the only way to be able to engage in a logical thinking way with the world, until it finally really pushed me out of it. And at the time, I had a roommate who was taking cognitive psychology courses, and I didn't even know psychology meant anything other than psychiatry. And she was starting to show me about the research studies that they did and how to learn about the brain. I thought that was really interesting. So I switched to cognitive psychology. And then from there, that world, again, in a narrowing perspective of how people talk about it, is most often talked about in terms of professors and academic research. That made sense to me. So I got the PhD, tried to do the professor tenure track, and that's a saturated market because tenure requires people to leave the industry, and all those seats are filled. And so from there, I've been finding my way, and I've basically been discovering other ways to bring my empathic and people-centric goals into helping others heal and find themselves, and really just the way that I like to logically think about things in areas where people don't typically talk about logically thinking.
Wow. Wow, that's a mouthful. That's awesome. So, if I could, I want to take a step back to when you were a kid and you were in elementary school, middle school, and high school. Were you ever identified as gifted or a part of a gifted program in school?
I was, looking back on it now, they were not the best performing schools. So their resources were very limited. And I think that for a long time, I considered this a setback. The seminar program in our elementary school, so that's the upper echelon of the gifted program in California, had 20 kids. And it was 20 kids in combined grades 3, 4, 5, 6. So you can imagine that's not a very enriching situation. And I often encountered teachers through elementary, middle, and high school that thought that gifted meant self-responsible. Oh, your friends can give you your vocab test. You don't have to do the math chapter, just take the test. Well, I learned very on to cheat, because gifted usually means most clever from point A to point B.
Oh, brother.
Right? So I didn't have a very supportive, enriched environment on what that looks like to actually push me forward. And it's funny that you bring that up now, because that's one of the struggles that I have as a second-year homeschooling mom with my kids, is all of the experiences I've had looked a certain way, and I don't even know what I was missing in terms of enriching their academic experience.
Wow. So we didn't even, we didn't even discuss this, but I did homeschool my kids. I'm a principal by trade and teacher. And I also have experience with curriculum development, which I absolutely love. And so one of the beauties of homeschooling and sort of a curse of it is there are no parameters. So you want to do everything, and you have to get to the point where you drill down. And for me, I wanted an experience that was not the typical sit and get, but my kids were used to it that first year. So we had sort of a hybrid. Um, but I'm a big proponent of the being part of teaching. And what I mean by that is, instead of us reading about science in a book, we'll read a little bit to get the information, but we're going to do the thing that needs to be done for you to experience this type of learning. So I actually got to a point where I coach parents on how to homeschool their gifted learners.
Do you really?
I do. It's such a niche market, and a lot of parents who do homeschooling is, I would wager to say that it's like the number one preferred option for gifted learners, because you do get to curate their education. Even if they go to a private gifted school, um, it still has its challenges, because the thing about it is, as a kid's parent, you've been with them from day one, and you really need to know a gifted learner so that you can provide them with learning in a way that they understand, and not only in a way that they understand, but in a way that it ignites a spark, because they can be like all or nothing sometimes. They really can be into it, or they'll just shut down. And so there really is, I think, a unique training and consideration that needs to go into teaching gifted learners, because a lot of times they need to be self-directed, and you need to be more of a guide. And if you put limitations on them, that's where they run into difficulties. I've shared this story before. I think this is two examples I like to give when I describe to people the gifted brain and how I see it, and based on research that I've done. Did you ever learn how to drive a stick shift?
I did, yeah.
Their brains are like that. You have to push that clutch and the accelerator just right, and move the gear just right, so that the vehicle will continue to run smoothly. If you don't, you can burn up that clutch. You can stop in the middle of the road, and your car is not going to perform optimally. So I just think that it has to be really thoughtful. You really have to think about it. And I'm glad you brought up the fact that, you had the experience where a lot of teachers don't get training, and they don't understand gifted learners. They confuse them with high achievers, and they're not always that bright student who is going to get straight A's, who's going to comply and conform with the teacher. No, they like to do things the hard way, and they like to question everything.
Can I tell you a
So,
funny story about that?
sure.
So by the time I got to junior high, we were in 8th grade, and we had what my mom tells me later was like a brand new teacher, right? He was like brand new. And he was our science teacher. And I think he ended up having us for 2 or 3 years, us, that cohort, right? Again, because we moved together because there weren't very many classes. So it was like the same kids. And so he did not set up his classroom authority very well from the get-go. He was like, kind of do what you want. There's candy up front, blah, blah, blah. And I remember at one point he pulled me aside and he was like, Alexis, you're kind of the ringleader, and I need you to fall in line, because people are going to fall in line. Because I basically treated school as like a stand-up comedy routine. And
Oh my gosh.
I was not the canonical teacher's pet. I was favored by the teachers, but I was also a smartass, and I was also talking out of turn constantly. And I actually developed really good comedic timing through that experience. And I, in the last 2 years, found him and went to kind of say, hey. And it turns out he's a principal of a middle school now at a different school. And got to reminiscing. And it's really funny because he said that was some of his favorite years of teaching, was teaching that class that I was part of. And when he tells other people, I really enjoyed teaching at Bell, they're like, why? Because Bell, the school had a image of being this really underperforming school. But he said what would happen is, in his curriculum development, he would have a lesson plan, and he'd be like, I know Alexis is going to ask this. And so he would go and like prepare with the follow-up answers. So out the gate, he really had to like really dive. He was like thrown into the deep end with us. So, but yeah, they often confuse, like you said, the high achievers, which is like the rule follower.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really like, I'm bored and entertain me.
Yes.
Is what the gifted is.
Yes. Yes.
So I have a question for you, and this is a
Sure.
little self-serving. So I mentioned before this call, I did 2 years of college undergraduate engineering, so I'm great at math. But I would say that I'm great at a plug and chug math, right? Give me the rules, I can be the computer, I can be the black box, and I can do the output. And that doesn't really develop creative thinking. And so I have had this huge mental block around teaching my children math because I know what I don't want it to be. I don't want it to be the worksheet put in front. And I
Yeah.
know you've had a guest on here talking about gifted homeschooling math, and I do intend to look into that. But higher level, and I'm curious your perspective on this. What I know about spirituality, what I know about sacred geometry,
Oh, you brought
right,
it up.
is that things don't develop in a linear fashion. We have exponential growth, we have geometric growth, we have Nautilus and Fibonacci sequences and things like this. I intuitively believe that children come into this world with this kind of hardwired knowing about the universe. And I think it gets stripped out of them when we force them into a linear system. So think about how we talk about when we're teaching numbers to small children. Again, this is my own experience. So if other teachers do this differently, they talk about ones, tens, hundreds, thousands. And it's emphasized as each of those is just multiplied by 10. But when we emphasize and anchor it in terms of multiplied by 10, that makes it sound like that's a linear progression. And
Mhm,
we know that it's not, which is
mhm.
why major magazines, when they're talking about the wealth income distribution or inequality, they actually have to show pictures to represent how much bigger a billion is than a million, than 100,000, because we all kind of have assumed and taken on that linearization. So I have pulled back from teaching the math because I don't want to do it in a way that imposes the linearity on their intuitive knowing. I haven't taken steps forward beyond math meditation, which we could talk about if you're interested, but I don't know what the inroad is. So I'm curious what your perspective is on all this.
Wow. So I think that you are exactly right. And I think that similar to the gifted brain, like math is seen as a cheetah, but it's really a carousel. And so I wish that in this country we adopted more of the Asian model of math because the way that they teach young children math is much more logical. Like you talked about the ones and the tens, they don't do it that way. They do it sort of differently so that just math unfolds to them in a more logical way and it's just much easier to grasp. And so for me, one of the things that I did, well, when I homeschooled, I'm not a math teacher, but I became one. And I know how valuable it is for kids to have an emotional experience to learning. And so the math curriculum that I use is, I would say, I used at least three different strategies. Number one, I use Singapore math, and it's a three-pronged approach. Are you familiar with it?
I am, in fact, we have the workbooks here from our charter school. I have not dug into it because my mental block is that it's pen and paper. So say
Well,
more.
here's what I'll say about Singapore math. There are actually two different types of curriculums for it out there. And I use the one that is the focus one. And so I had a textbook and a workbook. And what I would do is I would teach it, I would use the textbook and I would teach it to them. So they didn't have to use the textbook, but it has a three-pronged approach. So they get it, they get to see a concept from a concrete perspective, abstract, and pictorial. Like what you said, they get to see the picture. So it appeals to different learning styles. And so I like that about it. Um, um, the other thing I use are a lot of manipulatives. So I have like geometric shapes, even for that I used with my daughter as high as fifth grade. We still used manipulatives, all sorts of them. Like I have a huge tub, and schools at this age they don't typically use them, and I think that they're important, especially because not everybody understands math easily. Like there's a breakdown in the way that we teach it. People will make jokes about not being good at math, but you don't hear people saying, I was a terrible reader, do you?
Well,
And
I
I
do just from our research, but I take your point.
Well, I mean, a lot of you hear more people make jokes about being bad at math and reading. That's my point. And so I think that we really could rethink the way that we do it. There's a gentleman, his name is Scott something, and I'll have to look that up. He uncovered this way to learn math in a very unique way, and he has a business now, but he was one of those kids that I suspect is gifted. He goofed off. He was a good student, but because he was able to learn so quickly and to teach himself, he could do really advanced math. He was only interested in that. He kind of blew everything off, and he got down to senior year, last semester, English course, 1 point. He missed graduation. The teacher would not let him graduate. I just, my heart just bled for him. I'm like, why would she do that? But the way that he teaches people how to do math, to learn math the way that he did, I wish it was in every school in America. I'll have to look up his last name
Okay.
again because it escapes me at the moment. But I think that when kids get to create in math, it it does resonate for them. Like when you can create and uncover math in that way, you can do anything. Like that's the key to innovation. It really is. It's one of them, being able to be innovative in math. I don't know if I answered your question. I hope I did.
You did, yeah. So I'm familiar with this gentleman. He wrote a book called Math with Bad Drawings, and it's all
Math
about
with what?
bad drawings. It started as his
Oh,
blog. It's really
oh,
funny. He's the creator of Ultimate Tic-Tac-Toe, where you play tic-tac-toe as a grid of 3x3 tic-tac-toe games. It's really fun.
okay.
Anyway, from what I've taken from that book, it's very problem-based in terms of this is how we're teaching math wrong. And he's a mathematician. So in the book, he talks about how with multiplication, he thinks about it not as 7 times 15 trying to get the answer as if the answer is the solution. But he said the representation of 7 times 15 is where the play is, because then you can break that down into, 2 plus whatever, he visualizes that as a two-dimensional or three-dimensional object and then reconstructs it in that way to manipulate that to serve his needs. And I thought it was a fantastic starting point, but I got to the end of it, or, as I flipped through, I haven't actually read it cover to cover, but my sense is that it's not solution-based. It doesn't tell me what the answer is actually. And so the manipulatives that you're talking about, I'm on board. I bought them protractors and compasses because that was the fun for me. And we had a session where we played with mandalas, and we made mandalas again because they're very artistic and they're very linguistically advanced because they've been given the linguistic tools early on. My husband taught them both how to read before kindergarten because of his academic training.
Mhm.
And what has been missing is basically surrounding them with the tools that they need to excel in that way in math. So I'm hearing what you're saying with the manipulatives, and we have games like tangram games and blocus and things that allow you to kind of manipulate. And then I am at a loss of like, how do I go further with this? How do I go deeper? Because
So
yeah.
so yeah, that's awesome. I mean, I definitely games and even Cuisinart rods, just a lot of different types of manipulatives. But I would recommend that you do reach out to David, Math Without Borders, because or you can check out his website. There's a portion where he has like bonus materials.
That's what I was going to look at. Yeah.
Yeah, that have some really cool things in there. I sat through a presentation with him once, and for fun, he explained how he found the answer for pi. So I think he definitely can take you to the next level, because what he did was he took some of the materials that he found to teach math and he created his own math text for the same reason that you're talking about. So I think he would be a great person to follow with that. So I have a question that I wanted to ask you. You said you have a PhD in it's research and cognitive psychology, right?
So I say the research part so people don't assume I'm a psychiatrist, but my
Okay.
dissertation was on how the brain understands spoken language because we still fundamentally don't know that answer.
Okay.
Yeah.
Huh. I never thought about that. So, so I want to go back and ask you a question just to see if it resonates with you at all. I was listening to a speaker once who I admire, and he made a comment about how we are sort of stripped out of what it is that we want to become and who we are as individuals. And he said that when we're about 6 years old, we know what we want to do. But the rest of our, like, I guess, school career, we are bombarded with things that sort of talk us out of it or talk us out of who we are at our core. Um, can you talk about what it is that you remember wanting to be when you were little and how, if you can recall how that sort of dissipated for you, or if it did, or how it evolved?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I'm going to answer it in like a broader way because I think that this childhood thing is really important. And I don't think that it's limited to just what we want to be when we grow up. And so in the last 2 years, I have dug deep in myself spiritually, personal growth. I've been blessed with the environmental situation that has allowed me to do that. And a big part of that is basically, shedding these lenses that we've placed on ourselves or taking away the limiting beliefs that we have absorbed from going about our day to day and really getting back to the core of who we are. And so one of the things that in this modality, and it's Mandy Morris and Oliver Nino from Authentic Living for Life. And Mandy Morris is about to publish a book, which I think is really going to blow up. So this is going to be cool. One of the things that she teaches is in terms of like self-care or even finding what resonates for you as a unique individual is go back to play. Like, what was fun for you as a child? Like, are you someone that liked to dig in the dirt? Are you someone that enjoyed reading books? But did you enjoy reading books because of escapism, because of the environment, or because of the world building? And I have to say, my answer to that is very similar to the answer to the question you're asking. I don't remember because I was very much a worrier as a child. I worried constantly. I was very, it would have been anxiety, right? I wasn't diagnosed, but looking back, most certainly was anxiety. So I think that when it's talked about as age 6, I think that's an arbitrary cutoff. I think they're trying to make the point that it happens early on and then it's taken from us or it's buried because other things get piled on. I
I agree
wouldn't
with that.
ascribe it to the specific age, other than maybe they were correlating it to formal education. So I have had to dig deep for the times when I enjoyed myself because I'm not putting blame or judgment on anyone around me. I think that what I know about my own spiritual growth is that I'm a very gifted soul. I've had many, many, many experiences. If you believe in past lives, I've been here many times. So I believe that we choose the life and we choose the situation to flex our muscles and grow. And the situation that I chose was that I was very, very sensitive to energies. So a lot of those things got piled on at very, very, very early ages where maybe I don't have memories for it. Isn't that interesting? So I have had to relearn how to have an imagination because I don't remember having an imagination. Can you
Oh,
imagine that?
wow.
And in terms of manifesting and building and creating something new, imagination is step one. You have to know what it is you want to create. But I remember having, I was a tomboy, right? I was very into boy things and I had older brother. I remember having Barbies and just sitting in front of him and going like, what am I supposed to do with these? I guess they're going to go in the car. I guess maybe they're going to kiss. And to watch my daughters who take anything, they could take a piece of trash and weave magic and a world that just for hours. And I realized that I don't have that memory because I was supposed to relearn because I think my goal was my soul was so gifted that it was like, let's just take away the memories and have you relearn it late in life, make it more challenging. So in terms of what we want to be, I think that it really depends on the environment and how supportive that environment has been. How long have you allowed and nurtured that child to be who they are? And I'm discovering that what was fun for me was wordplay, which is why people said lawyer, right? That I was argumentative. I like making puns. I like being silly. I like cutting off people in a conversation to make a joke that amuses me, right? And I had to learn through social cues, cutting people off is rude. That's off-putting. People aren't going to respond well to that. But my friend and I have just started a podcast where it's really very much us playing together in this way.
Nice.